Welcome back to another episode of Chaz Calenda, attorney at law, here on the Coalition Radio Network. It's Wednesday night. That means we're here for another episode to talk about all the pressing issues we have here in the state of Rhode Island and throughout the United States, which reach us all on a legal and national level. Tonight, we're going to be looking at what happened recently, actually last night, in the state of Rhode Island. The vigorous debate that happened on the floors of the State House to discuss whether or not the governor should continue his executive orders and state of emergency that have been in place for nearly 2 years. The State House, the House of Representatives, the Senate, they invited public comment from anybody who could find the time to get their voices heard about whether or not they believe the governor should, at this point, be given the authority by the General Assembly to continue the state of emergency and his executive orders that accompany it. And boy, was there some outrage coming from that room last night. And we wouldn't know about it if it weren't for one particular individual. That would be, of course, Coalition Radio Network host and station management Pat Ford, who was there to cover the explosive commentary and back and forth that was going on in that room last night. I believe he may have been one of the only, if not the only, media presence in the room that night, filming and covering the actual event, which is shocking to me considering this is a topic of great public interest here in the state of Rhode Island. But Pat, from the bottom of my heart, as a open government transparency advocate here, I thank you for covering that and covering the reactions of our elected representatives in that room and the people who decided to show up and make their voices heard and reporting on it and filming it, so we the people who elected these representatives could see what was going on in that room. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for being a responsible and thorough journalist that you are.
Listen, I love what I do. I hope it comes through and it conveys itself. I'm the luckiest guy alive. Thanks to Keyshawn, we have no echoes, right? Luke Gehrig. But I am the luckiest guy alive. I feel like, and this is me talking to you because it's just us, right? I feel like I've been training for this for 20 years. Like everybody in that room last night, I was an activist. I understand the frustration of folks not getting feedback, not being able to engage with their elected leaders. When you go to these meetings, as great as last night was, to a sense, you feel like you're almost talking into an echo chamber. Except last night was a little different, and I'll explain that in a second. But, we've known for a while that we have no accountability from our public officials. We've known for a while that for them, Rhode Island is their own little private Idaho. We've known for a while that they are the true 1%, that they have, other than hopefully a limited amount of their family members getting ill, and hopefully not feeling that type of medical tragedy, because we want all Rhode Island, we pray for all Rhode Islanders to somehow avoid this illness in any way possible. But when it comes to their lifestyle, there have been no salary cutbacks. There have been no wage cuts. There have been no real impingements on the quality of their day-to-day life. In fact, many work from home. And while I've gotten to know in this job and as an activist a lot of the regular folks who run state government, and almost to every one of them, they're wonderful people. Our leaders live a life that I sometimes amusingly refer to, but in the depths of my dark heart, I believe, in a way that's not unlike the Russian apparatchiks, the bureaucrats of Brezhnev-era Soviet Union. They've got astonishingly good benefits. They've got a limited work week. There isn't a great deal of accountability. There doesn't seem to be any limits on salaries. A lot of these folks are making salaries that are 40 to 50% higher than they would for the same job in the dreaded private sector. Yet at the same time, the overall performance of government is atrocious. Now, again, I spent last night and today in the depths, the deepest, darkest depths of what we call Halitosis Hall. And when I call it Halitosis Hall, a guy named Rudy Cheeks, of the Philippe and Jorge comedy team, who are writers and still are writers of some renown, invented nicknames and titles that I could never be that creative. So I always give credit to Rudy Cheeks for this, but it is truly Halitosis Hall. And the Capitol Police, who are so helpful to people like me, the AV people who go out of their ways to make sure that folks like me, when we show up, all right, can actually get our job done. The rank and file that work in that building are great people. But it's that executive set who rule indiscriminately for their own private profit. Yes, I said it. For their own benefit. Many of whom are attorneys whose law practices, as you know better than anyone, are enhanced by their position. We have a champagne budget and we have terrible results. People call me negative for that. I believe I'm just stating the facts. Our school systems suck. And when I'm accused of potentially being racist because I want to end public education, yep, I said it, end public education. People say to me, well, what about gender equity? What about racial equity? What about what's going to happen to our children in the inner cities? And I say that's exactly why we need to end public education, because for them, it's terrible. There is no equity. The results are horrific. We are not preparing our children for the real world, never mind the greater world.
If you look at the results of our public schools here in Rhode Island and where our kids are in comparison to other states, the facts bear your argument out.
So when I rant and rave about that, sorry, but not sorry. And if that's offensive to people, oh well. And it's symptomatic of virtually every aspect of public life in Rhode Island. A lot of people are making a lot of money, quote unquote, helping the poor and running the state. I just regret that I didn't think of it. All right, what does that have in regards to last night? The power in that room. I've been in room 35 a whole lot of times. Room 35. And by the way, folks, the reason I don't stream from room 35 because it's in the basement. All right? You're just not going to get a clear digital signal. So I tape and we put it out afterwards. And we spend hours trying to do clips to give you not only the big picture, but salient information. But there was power. People were preaching. People were testifying. Last night, hundreds of Rhode Islanders took the time to show up, call in, and essentially say no mas. No mas, no more. To this crazy, out of control executive government. The executive power being demonstrated in that room and being unloaded on us, it's astonishing. I'll tell folks about how, who were the heroes last night, and there were some real heroes.
Yeah.
Names that we'll never know, and names that you should know, and names you do know. But I want to read something, and I know this is, reading people to people is sort of death. But I had an opportunity to question the governor the other day, and I want to read this for the record. It's only 3 paragraphs, so bear with me. And this is my question to Governor McKee. Citizens enact constitutions specifically to protect the citizenry against the governmental abuse of powers not formally accorded to the state, and to maintain a series of checks and balances between the 3 branches of government, executive, legislative, and judicial. Now, in Rhode Island, while the Constitution is silent on the use of executive orders, poorly worded statutes have allowed the state of Rhode Island to be ruled under unchecked executive power for nearly 2 years. There's something called the non-delegation doctrine, which is under separation of powers, a critical concept in Rhode Island that a generation before us fought exhaustively for years. The non-delegation doctrine under the separation of powers requires that there be sufficient safeguards against administrative use of said delegated powers. And an example of that I cited is the Rhode Island Department of Health, which continues to use arbitrary, ever-changing regulations in acting as an unelected yet fully weaponized body of government. So my question to the governor was this: why would citizens continue to support Rhode Island government when your administration, in conjunction with a General Assembly that has clearly abdicated its duty of legislative oversight of the executive branch, has simply chosen to ignore the civil liberties of thousands who have said enough? It's time to learn to live with COVID, not have either COVID, right? Hey, is that a term?
It's gonna be.
It's gonna be government. Let's take a vote. Who rules that is officially a term?
Everyone raise your hands. Yay.
Yay. Either government control their lives. Enough. And that was what you heard from a lot of regular folks. Now, in that room, if you're a regular denizen of Halitosis Hall, as am I, and you go down into the deep basement of Mortar, as often do I, listen, my Wi-Fi picks up right away. I know where the snack machine is, and I know where bathrooms are on 3 floors. For a middle-aged guy, that's pretty much everything. All right? All right? And yes, you should see me before I have that Snickers bar. All right? So, and anyway. What wasn't heard last night was the voices of people like me, for whom dulcet tones are familiar, astonishingly enough. But it was the every man and every woman who called, who were articulate, on point, consistent, and right, and pissed. You know, Chaz, you and I live in this bubble, I call. You've heard me refer to this before. You and I live in this bubble. And we sometimes forget that there are hundreds of thousands of Rhode Islanders who, like us, quite frankly, are working crazy hours. They've got young children, a lot of responsibilities, for whom, and I say this with profound respect, for whom day-to-day life is really a question of a survival. One more day. And they don't have the time or the luxury to be as involved as, say, folks like you and I have found ourselves. So it is our duty, our responsibility to represent them in any way we can. Not represent us, but represent the greater them. I think some of us do a fairly good job of it. But what happened last night was like a dam broke. An absolute dam broke. A gusher of emotion and frustration and pain and exhaustion. And it's out there. A lot of us were starting to give up a little bit.
Sure.
We remain convinced that people felt strongly about it. I don't think we realized how strongly people felt. I don't think we do.
Do you think that the representatives in that room were feeling that pushback that you're referring to, that dam breaking?
Shaken to their core.
Shaken to their core.
All right. The only token opposition to that was Teresa Tanzi, who continued to try to put Blake Filippi on the hot seat as to the relevance of the conversation he was having. The two legislative superstars, as I felt last night, all right, there were two of them. The most obvious, of course, was Blake Filippi. Mm-hmm. Now, anyone who's ever had the opportunity to speak with Blake in person, or perhaps seen him remotely, perhaps seen him interviewed, first of all, don't underestimate the legal brilliance of Blake Filippi. Blake Filippi served on the board of something called the 10th Amendment Center, which is an internationally recognized organization that talks about the 10th Amendment, which is, of course, focused largely on state powers. And So he's extremely articulate. He knows the material cold. He's a gentleman who's practiced law at a very high level, and it shows. And quite frankly, I think the word I used when we spoke briefly this afternoon was he was parrying with her. A better word would be toying. All right? Because in the Battle of Wits last night, Teresa Tanzi entered the field of warfare dangerously unarmed. Right?
Wow.
It was watching her try to speak and to debate Blake Filippi was sort of like the legislative equivalent of a driver's ed film, where you find yourself in the passenger seat watching the wall approach, seeing oblivion on the horizon, yet oddly fascinated and unable to move or avert your gaze. Right?
Now tell us how you really feel, Pat. I mean, my God.
Oh my God. Because that's all she could do. I'll refer to it based on my experiences in some boards that I belong to, as the sort of parliamentarian nonsense that one pukes up, and I mean pukes up, when you have nowhere else to go.
When they don't want to have the debate.
I mean, it was astonishing to watch. And they sat meekly there. All right, there's a few street terms I could use about what Blake made of them. I'll spare us for once.
This is a whole new Pat Ford.
No, this is the real Pat Ford. Now, so Blake was Blake, and it was just amusing to watch, because the cat and mouse. You know when the cat plays with the mouse and just tosses the mouse around a little bit with a ball, with a little bit of yarn? That's what was going on there.
That's almost embarrassing, to the point that there's a sitting state representative being toyed with to that level.
The second more surprising, and when I say this, I want to be very careful. Brian Newberry is a smart, sophisticated attorney who is very, very strong on civics, government. Typically, he's been a lot quieter. He's not, I don't want this to seem negative at all. He's not a flashy guy. Very, very smart. Don't ever underestimate Brian Newberry's horsepower. Brian Newberry was on fire last night. The pair of them, it was quite honestly a sight to behold. It's reminiscent of 1980s steel cage death matches, and the two of them were just. What's the move when they jump up on the rope? Somebody help me with this. And together, and just that's what it was like.
The flying elbow smash off the top rope.
I knew you would know that. And that's what it was like. Now, the evening opened up, and forgive the voice. The voice is a little shot at this point. The evening opened up with, as is always the case, the cognoscenti, the expert witnesses, the hoi polloi, if you will, of Rhode Island state government. And there are a lot of people who object to that. And I don't. As someone who's had to wait sometimes till 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning to testify back in my activist days, as someone who's had to do that, I find it to my advantage. Because number one, when I testify, it's to the camera. It's not to the people sitting in front of me. I don't think I can change their opinions. It's going to be brute electoral force and the voice of the people that's going to force them to acknowledge the intellectual superiority of the other opinions. But it allows you to sit back and hear all their arguments.
Mm-hmm.
A few years back, it was the annual rite of passage, the soda tax bill. And people should know that I loathe the concept of the soda tax because it's built on lies. And Big Soda was there, and then there was Little Soda. And of course, someone whose family I have great respect for, an individual I have great respect for, is John Zambato at the legendary Yacht Club Soda Company. So I always feel like when I'm there, I'm on a personal mission for him. And one of the representatives, I think it was the Heart Association, got up and spun the big lie, which was that in Philadelphia, when the soda tax was enacted, soda sales went down 50%. So, you got 45 minutes or an hour to kill. I already kind of knew the answer, but through the miracle of Google, I verified it. So finally came my time to speak. I pointed out the big lie, and I use the L word, the lie word. Sometimes I say prevaricate, but very often I just like to throw the lie word out there. Soda sales hadn't gone down by 50% overall. The suburbs directly outside of Philadelphia experienced a compensating increase in sales, which of course cost inner city businesses, which in the case of Philadelphia are primarily minority owned, a great deal of money. It's a profit factor that allows you to keep the doors open. So I got to ask the head of the Heart Association and a variety of members of the Solons, the wise men, if you will, our spiritual leaders at Halitosis Hall. I didn't know you guys were, I know you guys were anti-small business, but I didn't know you guys were racist as well. All that money that you cost folks in the majority community that contributes or constitutes most of Philadelphia business, I'm shocked and I'm appalled. You certainly aren't going to try to do the same thing to inner city urban core entrepreneurs for whom soda and other associated beverages constitute a significant part of the income they need to keep their doors open. You're not racist like they are you?
Sort of like the equivalent of the legal question of when did you stop beating your wife?
You've seen a trend here, right? So,
yes.
So anyway, the people that opened up the conversation were, of course, what I call the usual suspects. And Angelica Infante Green was there, the head of the school department. Now, again, I'm around these people to we all get along. We're friendly, polite. But her entire objection, and this is where I want you to come in, her entire raison d'être, there I go. Boy, did I just butcher that. But the reason for being was because of their ability to hire retired teachers because of in the crazy patchwork quilt of laws that constitutes Rhode Island. You've got this whole, you're a retiree, but you can't work again because you're double dipping. How's it? God forbid we just hire people on their skills, right? And the need
we can't do that.
The need to have them work for us because there is now, shockingly, a shortage of substitute teachers here in the state. And we have teachers going down for a week or two with the dread COVID or the ill or the flu or whatever it is. We got a situation. So that's the reason why you suspend civil liberties in the state and radically redraw the relationship between the executive and the legislative branch, right? Doesn't that seem... Now, my question to you, Counselor, and the question raised by the legal team of Filippi and Newberry was, I don't know, can't we just change that by statute? Can't we just change that by statute?
Yes, you can.
Yes.
100%. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
That's how our government is set up. The legislature makes the laws. The executive branch does not make the laws. They enforce the laws. And why hasn't the government, the General Assembly in this case, who've been, by the way, confirming judges, magistrate, patronage positions, department heads, considering bills of all sorts. I looked through probably 50 different bills that have been introduced into the House and the Senate. They're conducting regular business. Why can't they go now and conduct regular business on a regular basis? Why do they need to invoke the emergency statute that gives the governor all this ability to do this, to do these suspension of civil liberties when the General Assembly is functioning just fine, relatively speaking?
You think? And that's the only reason she had. There was no other reason that she could proffer, as it were. And I'm sitting here going, because that's all she had.
Well, what else can she say? What else can she say? I mean, she's obviously interested in the area that, you know, her so-called expertise comes from. And she's seeing, you know, this from a, you know, I don't know if it's just a dollars and cents perspective, but from a, you know, a difficulty perspective of having schools do their job. I don't know, but I mean, what else can she say to justify extending, quote, 2 weeks to flatten the curve to now over 2 years? I don't know. I don't know what else she could say. I mean, she's got to say something that's fair, somewhat cogent, but I don't know that she ever even made that point.
No. And because there is no point to be made. They just have nothing to say. So then we went to the Department of Health. And a guy who I like, and here's the thing, what happens is you spend too much time in the building. You're like me. You know, you like everybody. All right? You just do.
You got to get along with people.
Right. You just do. So I like these people, even though some of them are thieving bastards. But a guy that I genuinely like is a guy named Neil Heitman. Forgive me if I mispronounce his name. I met him years ago when he was a campaign manager for Ken Block. Now he's a spokesman or one of the honchos at your and mine, Rhode Island Department of Health. All right? Oof. Not a good look for him last night. Grotesquely misstated numbers. Just wasn't in touch with reality. It just struck a lot of us that he was just making shit up.
So a continuation of what's been going on at the Department of Health for the last 2 years.
And a reflection of the new leadership. Because nothing says winging it like Dr. McDonald does it.
Oh, I am still reeling from the shock that he's been promoted to interim director, given his less than impressive, and I'm being generous, less than impressive testimony at the parents' mask case in front of Judge Lanphier. Because, I mean, if he was my witness, I probably would have withdrawn my case.
I think we referred to it during last week's stellar questioning by your representative of the Coalition Radio Network at the governor's press conference, introducing him as the titular head of your Rhode Island Department of Health, as just off the lying tour of 2021. Fresh from his appearance in lying in Superior Court. You've got Jim McDonald, the clown prince of the Rhode Island Department of Health.
And that's not an exaggeration. Here's a guy who admitted on the stand he did not even bother to look at studies that did not comport with his own opinion. I mean, how that man was allowed to testify as an expert without being an actual expert. So I'm saying that not to diminish his credentials, but I'm saying that as somebody who's going to testify as an expert in a case needs to be aware of all, or at least a vast majority of studies that are going on in the field that they hold themselves out as being an expert in, so they can offer expert opinions on whether or not that study is valid, what their rebuttals are, if any, or whether or not that study is actually something that we really need to consider. And he admitted he didn't do it. That alone should have disqualified him.
I can only assume that they want him in there because he is a complete toady. That's spelled T-O-A-D-Y, toady. How's that? Have you heard that the toady card been played lately?
Not lately. Not lately. I'll give you that one. That was a good one.
How would you define toady? I would say as someone who's obsequious in his utter adulation of someone in power whose willingness to be a coat hanger, there's a 1950s term for you, a coat hanger for said politician, is only obscured by his blatant desire to somehow be meaningful.
I am for once I'm at a loss for words. That was a mouthful, and I don't think I could say it any better than that.
And by the way, coat hanger is an old term that goes back to 50s politicians. And a coat hanger is someone who would follow a politician around, all right, and literally when it came time to come in, he would take the coat off so that the politician could gracefully lurch right into the heart of the conversations of the meeting or the matters at hand. And when it was time to go, without even looking, would hold his hands back so that the coat could be gracefully placed on so that he could then whip his scarf around and leave the meeting gracefully and with a dash of flair. The coat hanger is slathering, if you will, approval, marching closely behind him. Accidents, of course, would occur if said politician stopped too quickly because the nose of said doctor would be firmly up said politician's ass within moments. All right? So, so this is what transpires for leadership. Again, I'm going to call it now the law firm of Blake Filippi and Brian Newberry, because it was rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat last night. And
just sorely needed. But
in
this environment.
What was also impressive is they also knew when just to get out of the way and let the people talk.
Right.
And other winners, Rick Southwell got up there and just, I mean, my eyes were watering, the flames that were coming out there. And I don't think, I'll tell you what they weren't prepared for. When folks like Rich got up there and delivered, what was palpable in the room was the pure human emotion. These are people who had waited, in some case, 2 years to get up and have their say. And boy, they said it. You know, Matt Allen of WPRO fame, noon to 3 o'clock on AM 630. Always a great listen. All right? He talked about it, as someone who was watching. If you were in the room, and Matt, by the way, gives great coverage of this. A lot of common sense arguments. Listen to his show. But if you were in that room, you felt the fire. And Matt sensed that. You felt the fire. These are people who have suffered with their children, who sat in a courtroom at their own expense, by the way, their own personal expense. And if you get a chance, at some point we'll list the page up on the coalition where you can donate to their cause. Send them a few bucks. It's not just the money; it's the moral support that indicates when you send them a few bucks at their own expense. At the evidence that they brought to the table, Judge Lanphier, I will repeat, found that irreparable harm has in fact occurred in the case of Rhode Island children. In most of these cases, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but in most of these cases, it is either the relative position of the plaintiff, it is technicalities that exist in the law that may prevent individuals or cases from being sued. It may be the relationship between how vague the laws are with regard to executive powers. This is what's croaking, from my uninformed perspective, a lot of these mass lawsuits. Is that a fair statement? And how would you build on that legally?
Absolutely. That is a fair statement, because I think one of the part of your question that you posed to the governor the other night that I don't recall seeing a answer to, but was exactly that. Is some of this was is the result of poorly worded statutes, vaguely worded statutes, which don't really rein in any sort of abuse that could take place. And the General Assembly has the opportunity to do that. They have the opportunity to do that if they're listening to their constituents and not their special interest groups. And quite frankly, the missing party, I don't know if missing is the right word, but the party that could be doing something about it if the General Assembly continues to sit around and do nothing about it, the Attorney General has not only not done anything about it, he's actively fought against it. And I think you're right, Pat, when you talk about people, in some cases, having 2 years of pent up frustration, hurt, anger, the feeling that they're not being heard. I experience this on a daily basis. People have been calling me since the state of emergency was declared by Governor Raimondo in March of 2020 about these exact same issues. The restrictions, the onerous business restrictions, the onerous restrictions in schools. And they have tried calling their representatives and their senators to no avail. They have tried calling the Attorney General to no avail. They have tried calling the governor's office to no avail. No one is listening to them. They're going to their school committees. Their school committees are shutting them out. They're having people arrested. Because they're not wearing masks at a school committee, or because they get a little too rambunctious, a little too loud at a school committee meeting. This last night is, I believe, hopefully the culmination of the tide potentially turning on this subject, because to me, I've seen it cut across partisan lines. I've cut it. This is not an issue necessarily from the people's perspective that they're looking at from a partisan perspective. They're looking at it as far as, this has hurt my kids. And when you mess with my kids, you're messing with me. And you know what? I don't really care if I voted for you in the past or if I voted for your party in the past. You're not listening to me, and that's just not going to fly with me. And I'm going to let you have it at this point. And we got the old saying, throw the bums out. You know what? That to me sounds like we're inching closer and closer to that with every day that goes by, that the government has been less than receptive to their constituents.
Another superhero, as far as last night goes, a name you might not know, is a woman by the name of Lori Gaddis Barrett.
I know Lori, and I think quite highly of her.
Yes. She is turning out to be a phenomenon. Her organizational skills, her ability to give the encouragement, the support to people who need, who are looking for a voice. A lot of folks aren't comfortable in that environment. Personally, I'm working on the shyness thing too. It's a problem, and I gotta see if I can become a little bit more outgoing. But Lori just, first of all, she makes the phone calls. Listen, if you want a great forum to call during the day, when coalition shows aren't on, by the way, again, she'll call Maddie Allen. She puts the word out there. She gets people engaged, understanding that the battles that we need to have happen are going to take place at the school board level, the town council level, and meetings like last night. Understanding that the school board battles and the town council battles are just as, if not more important. Because as you're aware, so much of this policy is set at a local level.
Yes.
So where you're going to, and quite frankly, a lot of self-interested folks have reigned supreme. Now, I'm not knocking all the people. There's a lot of people who do yeoman's work, on these boards. Being on these boards is no treat. You're making decisions that by definition people are going to disagree with. You're going to be villainized in some cases. You're going to be a source of controversy. And you're also going to engage in long hours. You just are. And, so there's a lot of well-meaning, hardworking people. But there's also a lot of people who are overtly attempting to hijack and have hijacked those school boards. All right? And it's unfortunate because what happens is that's where, quite frankly, a lot of the sausage gets made. All right? A lot of the sausage gets made. And let's talk about school boards like Barrington. Let's talk about the Barrington 3 for just a second. Got a couple things coming up. Let's talk about them next week. But, in the case of the Barrington 3, you had a school board arbitrarily set on their own a vaccine mandate. And 3 women have decided not to comply and have ultimately lost their jobs because of it. Now, there is some due process going on. Then we'll talk about next week. But that organization, in and of itself, decided that they were going to interfere with the lives of their teachers. None of these regulations were in place when their employment contract started for that year. And it's based really on no science. And these are 3 exceptional teachers, well documented. They made the decision. There's a guy on that board by the name of Patrick McCran. I hope I got the name right. Originally on board with the vaccine mandate. Had the cojones, the balls, to say, you know what? When push came to shove as far as the teachers, I'm going to vote a different way. I see things differently. I've had conversations with people. I've done research. I feel this is wrong. And I'm putting words in his mouth to a degree. I'll let him at some point, when this is all over, I'm going to ask him to go on the record. But that's my takeaway. Those are the type of small-town heroes, forgive me, I won't break into I need a hero, right? But those are the type of people on a town-by-town basis that do the really hard work and are willing to change their minds in the face of additional information. How often do you see that? I mean,
never.
No.
Never, ever. And I saw the video of the termination hearing from the Barrington Town Council, and I saw his consternation with what was about to be done, which was preordained in that hearing. But I saw him struggling with that decision, and I respect people who can say, you know what, yeah, I did vote for that policy originally, but I have done my own internal searching, my own soul searching to determine whether or not what we're doing here is right. And I've come to a different conclusion tonight. And, if that's indeed how he felt, he should be praised for that, because it doesn't happen anymore.
No. But we need more Patrick McCrans. Folks, now we're approaching the time of year where in a number of municipalities, not all, but a number of municipalities, a number of school boards, a number of water boards, a number of town councils, a number of harbor organizations, they're all over the place, are going to be up for election or appointment. Listen, I'm not going to mince words. A lot of these boards require a lot of work. But it's time for communities to step up and take back control of their own destinies. Does that
100%?
Now, when I say destinies, does that sound a little exaggerated? No.
It's not exaggerated in this situation.
Your school board will have more impact on the life of your family than the General Assembly, the governor, any of them.
More than the President of the United States.
Yeah. It's right there. Make government local again. Take back what is rightfully yours. On one hand, you'll see the complexity of some of these decisions. And you'll say to yourself, all right, maybe some of these people I have a little bit more appreciation of or a little bit more understanding. But at the same point, we can't just complain anymore.
And that's been the biggest problem in my view of Rhode Island in recent history, is that you have a lot of people who feel the same way that you're talking about, that I'm talking about tonight, Pat, that, I have taken to social media or whatever platform that they may have and complain. They said, we need to change things. Things in Rhode Island are not working for me, but have not been willing to step up and do what needs to be done to make that change. Take back their government. Take back the we the people part of our government. And I think what we're seeing now, with the help of people like Lori, like we were talking about before, we're seeing now is a mobilized and organized effort to help people who ordinarily would not want to be involved in this for various reasons. Personal, they're time consuming, they're difficult, like you were talking about. But we're seeing people saying, listen, if I can't do anything, I can't change anything by simply complaining. I got to do something about it. And that's the reason I'm running for Attorney General, Pat. It's the reason why a lot of people are running for the positions that they're running for, is because the last 2 years, they have seen it. They have seen enough. And I am hopeful, not just for myself. I'm hopeful for the state, because the state needs it. The state needs an enema from its political governance. It needs an enema, and it hopefully gets one, because there is no political accountability. There is none. There are no meaningful checks and balances on our government, because they do not fear we the people. They do not fear their loss of power, because they haven't lost their power and they haven't lost their power in over 80 years. So, the only way they're going to change is if there is this groundswell of people willing to step up and challenge them in a way that was coherent, in a way that was fact driven, in a way that was heart wrenching. I would argue, like it was last night.
Right.
Put these people in an uncomfortable position to have to make this decision of, are we going to listen to you, our constituents, or are we simply going to continue our unchecked power over you without caring about what your input is? And I don't think there are going to be many people who are going to stand for that much longer.
No, it's time. There's this great moment. There's a movie called The Blind Side. There's a great moment in it. And this is the movie where, the young man who comes from a difficult background, a black young man, African-American, and he goes to live in a White House, and he plays at a really nice school, and he plays football, and he ended up playing, I guess, football for the Baltimore Ravens, I believe it was, Michael Oker. And there's this funny scene, but it's poignant all the time at the same time. And the quote is, what's happening in the game is that Michael is a giant, but he's a gentle giant. And all of a sudden, a statement that his adopted mom and the coach say to him about protecting his family that just turns on that just turns on that fierce protective instinct. And literally someone who is torturing him on the football field, he blocks him out of the stadium. And he literally blocks him out of the stadium. And I think he said something effective. I'm sorry, Coach, it was time for him to go home. And it's time for a lot of these guys and gals to go home.
It is.
You know, the visceral disgust on the faces of people like Teresa Tanzi when reacting to the great unwashed. I just had this mental image of her just saying, going home and saying to her friends, Lovey, you won't believe what happened at this Capitol building tonight. These people showed up and they expressed a desire for something, civil liberties or something like that. What will they say at the ACLU? You know? And they seemed rather upset. You know.
They caught, I believe they caught her in a rather unflattering photograph last night of her reaction while some of these people were speaking, and it was almost to the point of why do I have to sit here and listen to this? It was, in my opinion, quite the unflattering photo.
Right. So we need more of last night. I guess that's the thing. Again, we can't leave it up to Lori Barrett to do all the organizing. There's a lot of great people in the Parents Union. There's a lot of great people in the Freedom Fighters. Paul Rihanna continues. Paul Rihanna had great moments last night. A lot of powerful stuff there. You know, he spoke to the notion that you've had this group of folks who put their lives literally on the line. And one of the most heartbreaking things I've seen in Rhode Island politics has been in the last year when I see these signs from these folks who did literally the Lord's work at these hospitals, literally wore trash bags as PPE, literally dealt face-to-face, arm in arm with people suffering from COVID, to have to say that they've gone from heroes to zeros. Paul was on fire last night.
As he should be. As he should have been. And as people who represent our state, they should be ashamed of that policy. They should be absolutely ashamed of what they have put those people through, particularly in the early days of the pandemic, when we really didn't have all this information that we have now. And these people were literally putting their lives on the line for something that we really didn't know much about. Right. And it's embarrassing, if you're asking me, and you know, maybe nobody's asking me, but I'm asking me. But it's embarrassing that not none, but the vast majority of our state representatives and state senators decided that we're gonna let the Department of Health do this. We're gonna let the governor do this, and it's even more embarrassing that we have a federal judge who's upholding that all along the way. A federal judge, by the way, who was a lifelong public defender, who used to my knowledge, not to my knowledge, it is to my knowledge, my personal knowledge, used to stick up for people's constitutional rights, used to stick up for people's civil liberties. I don't know what happened there, but it's an embarrassment to our state.
And you know what's incredibly disgusting? You know, I spoke to Paul yesterday. I spoke to Paul at the State House. They were laid off last fall. In certain cases, they're just starting to hear their appeals for their unemployment compensation literally this week.
Which are going to be dog and pony shows.
How the hell is that possible?
It's possible because the Department of Labor and Training makes it possible. They're an administrative agency. There are no safeguards of administrative abuse, just like you asked the governor, Pat. This is exactly why the non-delegation doctrine exists, because you cannot have administrative agencies running wild without legislative oversight, or in this case, even judicial oversight. Nothing stopped the judiciary from getting involved, but the judiciary has been essentially a rubber stamp for everything that's gone on anytime it's been challenged at this point. I'd say Judge Lanphier gave it a good effort, but even he was reluctant to get involved into this. But it's, at some point, this is what we get to. This is what we get to. We get the pure visceral outrage from the people who have had to go through this process. And now they're just sticking it to them, even with the unemployment hearings. We know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen at the administrative level. They're going to lose their unemployment hearings, because that was the carrot on the stick that they kept saying, that the Department of Health kept holding out there for our healthcare workers to say, get the vaccine, and, or whatever it is. If you quit, or if you resign, you're not going to get unemployment. If you get fired, you're not going to get unemployment if you don't get the vaccine. That was their way of trying to coerce people to do it. They didn't do it. Not only did they hold off on giving them these hearings, they're now going to deny it, and it's going to require another court to get involved to review those decisions.
Right. The moment when Paul Ariana spoke to having food drives to support medical workers who had been fired by the state at a time in which we're hiring infected workers, and I use that term loosely, obviously, at a time when we're importing highly compensated, overcompensated visiting nurses, at a time when we've had to deploy the National Guard, you could have heard a pin drop. Enough said.
I would hope that would be the reaction. There's what else? What kind of rebuttal could anybody give to that? I'm fairly good at making arguments in court, but if that's what you're coming at me with, that's a pretty hard act to follow.
And I know that I've left a lot of people out. There's a lot of, there's a lot of people who showed up today, at Calenda. All sorts of people showed up. And so, I'm mentioning people who are at the top of my mind right now. But
sure,
clearly, a significant part of Rhode Island last night got up and again said no mas.
And how much time were they all given, Pat, to make these points?
A minute.
2 minutes.
A minute, 2 minutes. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's amazing. But even with that 1, maybe 2 minutes, they were able to, in your words, I think earlier tonight, shake those legislators to the core.
Yeah.
That's an impressive feat.
Hopefully last night was the beginning.
We need to see more of it.
Right.
We need to see more of that. If you want real change in the state, you need to hold your elected officials accountable. They may be nice people. Like you say, Pat, people get along. You may not agree on every issue. We may not all see things the same way, nor should we. We should always have a healthy, robust debate on these types of issues. But at the same time, you know what? When they're not listening to you and they're not being responsive to your concerns, you know what? Your favorite state legislator who's not being responsive, time for them to go. When your favorite state official is not being, state officer is not being responsive to your biggest concerns, time for them to go. Time to bring in someone who will be accountable, who will feel accountable, who will feel that they have a duty to represent your interests as your elected official. And right now we are sorely missing that in Rhode Island. I hope 2022 is a year that Rhode Island has the Great Awakening. And I mean that in a general sense, not in any sense that the media has been using it recently, but I hope there is that Great Awakening amongst the Rhode Island citizenry that we have. We've had enough. We've had enough of this executive rule. We are not in a monarchy. We are not in any sort of top-down, you do what you're told ruling type of state. This is not North Korea. This is not any one of those types of dictatorships where we all have to sit here and take it under the penalty of we lose our livelihoods. Mm-hmm. And it's embarrassing, the lack of action of many of our leadership, so-called leaders of our government, that they have done absolutely nothing to take action to fix this.
Well, at a moment like this, I say, bring us home.
Well, it's been, I think this is an issue that needed to be brought to everybody's attention. Not that it wasn't. It's been, and thank you again, Pat, to you for making this the issue that made the top of the coalition radio's top list of their priorities, because it wasn't the priority of a lot of other news organizations to make sure that this was properly covered. So it really brought an inside perspective to the regular folks who couldn't take the time out of their, who weren't able to, for very valid reasons, weren't able to call in or write in or give in-person testimony. This really brought an inside perspective to that, and I think people needed to see it. And I think you did a great service to the people of Rhode Island by covering this. And I truly thank you as somebody who was very supportive of having as transparent a government as possible. So I'm glad we could cover this topic on Chaz Calenda, Attorney at Law, episode 26, We the People. And I hope we the people will continue to try to hold our elected officials accountable.
If I could throw in one shameless plug here.
Of course.
If people listen to this week, if you could, we have to get back to work on blowing up our social media. So as a favor, if you haven't liked our page, it's facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. If you go to my page, Pat Ford or ours, you'll see our link tree. And, we've got a YouTube page that I would ask you to take a moment, to follow. Follow us on Twitter at Coalition_Radio. I apologize. In Twitter, I can't follow people back right now because I like to follow. I have thousands of people, and I guess I'm at my limit. But I will try to follow all my folks who follow us. It's critically important to us, and I'll say why. We don't have the budget of the big networks, and I went off a little bit yesterday, Chaz. I think you saw my post on my frustration on the lack of coverage. I want to point out to folks something interesting, a little trivia here that people may not be aware of. The reason why you have an NBC and a CBS and an ABC on television is largely the companies that started those networks were granted the use of our airwaves. The airwaves belong to the public. They don't belong to a corporation. They're licensed. And the value of these airwaves, obviously, as technology has blown up, are priceless. Despite the fact that there historically was a tacit agreement that these networks would provide news coverage, they failed to. Both at any level, on a local level or a national level. And yet they reap billions, untold billions. Well, that's not going to change anytime soon. So the one thing that you can do to help independent media is it'd be great if you bought a T-shirt. It'd be great, and please, by the way, let me just make this case. This is actually very important to us. Dave LeVake from Brood Awakenings has provided a home for virtually everyone in what I'll call the liberty community. People who support civil rights, people who support civil liberties, people who support the rights of the individual, people who support our Constitution, people who support natural rights according to Dave LeVake has gone out of his way to provide a home for fundraisers, and I'm just not saying political ones. One of the nicest fundraisers I attended was something called Hope for Haiti at one of Dave's locations. Yacht Club Soda is a sponsor here. Greatest soda in the world. For that alone, you should buy the damn soda. Don't buy the refinery soda. But that family does amazing things for the community. Gracious in their time and their support. These are people who quite frankly, given the polarization of today's politics, invite a great deal of public pressure on their businesses, their personal businesses, by helping members of the community. We need to support them. Go buy some Yacht Club soda this week. Enjoy the greatest root beer on the planet. If you're in Warwick or Cranston, you see Dave's spots, Brewed Awakenings, swing by. In Warwick, on Bald Hill Road, they even have a drive-through now.
Absolutely.
Don't go to Dunkies. Come on. What has Dunkin' Donuts done for the community that you live in recently? No secret. I'm older. Middle age is here. Maybe a little more. It's tough as you get older to make new friends, right?
Certainly.
Chaz, you're a friend. Dave LeVrake's a friend. John Scambato's a friend. Anna O'Rourke's a friend. Lori Manners Garrett's a friend. Meg Potter's a friend. Support this entire community. Rich Southwell, understated Italian, brilliant man. He's a friend. These are all people working not just for their own self-interest, but on your behalf. Whatever they're doing, support them. Find members of our community. Support them. Crystal, who has done yeoman's work in terms of advocating for families whose children are forced to mask. Listen, if I missed anybody, I apologize, because I could go on for a couple hours with this. But this is a time of crisis, and there are individuals stepping up in the community. Everyone I've met in this community has superpowers. It's just a question of figuring out what they are and harnessing them. And lots of people play different roles. Organizer, maybe you're comfortable being that public face, maybe you're not. I met a couple of wonderful women last night, both of whom, it's funny, I'd never met each other. They're both mechanical engineers. Wonk heaven, have done exhaustive research on their own. By the way, last night, just as an aside, I had the spectacle of seeing a state house representative question the work integrity of a mechanical engineer who has a PhD from the University of Massachusetts. Are you kidding me?
May I ask what the qualifications of said representatives were to question those credentials?
I think he's like a chiropractor or a dentist or some crap.
See.
Which, God bless you, but stay in your lane.
Right.
I probably am guilty of that too. I pretend to be a lawyer every week on this show. But anyway, that shameless plug went a lot longer than I intended to. But
needed to be said, and I couldn't echo that any better than you just said it, Pat. These people need to be supported, and I absolutely advocate supporting the independent journalism that you're doing here on the Coalition Radio Network. I've bought myself a Coalition hoodie. I've bought myself the infamous Buddy Cianci t-shirt. I wear them proudly. I just not only show support for the Coalition Radio Network, but also its interesting sense of humor, their excellent, interesting sense of humor that they represent. So we need more independent journalism to be supported here in Rhode Island, because we really have very little of it. So once again, Pat, I thank you for what you're doing here. I thank the people that you mentioned for going out of their way and taking their time, their valuable time, in helping us achieve what needs to be done in this state, which is wholesale change, wholesale accountability on a statewide and local level. And with that, we